It's a special edition of the BumbleKast. I'm your host, Ian Flynn, the Bumble King, and joining me as always is my Bumble co-host, Kyle, JCRB Kraus.
Hello, we have a guest today. It's been a little while since we've had a guest. Welcome.
Yes, please welcome the one and only Lorenzo.
Hello, everyone. Hi, Kyle. Hi, Ian. Pleasure to be here.
Hello.
Pleasure to have you. Tell the folks at home who you are, what you do, and all that jazz.
Okay, well, my name is Lorenzo Hall. I'm a newcomer to comic writing. I actually did one story for TMNT for IDW. I co-wrote with Gigi Dutre. Before that, I used to be a teacher and a novelist for 2 independent books. Other than that, working on one graphic novel now and enjoying being in the fan space.
That is a hell of a flex, dude.
It's
Very
not
impressive
compared to
resume.
yours.
No, I have immense respect for any teacher. Teacher immediately eclipses everything else. What grades did you teach?
Let's see. I did high school freshman. Before that, I was a college tutor and like entry-level English in community college.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, that
Very
made up
cool.
most of my career. Thank you. From 2016 into 2022. Thank
Neat.
you, guys.
Yeah, my wife's a teacher too, so she's
Oh,
been
wow.
teaching for like most of her life, most of her professional life.
boy.
So, yeah, that's
Yeah.
awesome.
It is.
There's so much that goes into it. What does she
it
teach?
is-
Right now, she does 8th grade science, middle school
Hey.
science. So, Ian, talked over you. What was that?
Well, I'm just saying, I know that teachers work incredibly hard and are not acknowledged nearly enough.
Can confirm.
For sure. Like it's a very intense job, and like when you do like know that you're making a breakthrough with students, it's amazing. Just for me,
Mhm.
like the only reason I stopped, well, the pay was but like, if you're doing that, it's not always about the pay. It's just like so much time goes into it, both on the clock and off. And if I wanted to like really invest in my writing career, I had to kind of make that decision. So that's how I got
Fair
to
enough.
where I am right now. Yeah.
Yeah.
But I'm happy with it. There's always the future.
You can always go back. They're always looking for
Yeah.
teachers.
Always go back to school, folks. Remember that. But let's see. Today, I am hoping I can learn from you guys. So I got some questions here that I want to open with. And then I want to ask about your work, Ian. Obviously, we're going to hit on the favorites, but I also want to ask about work that comes from you and your heart. Not to be too
Okay.
melodramatic.
What-
So let's see.
We're writers. We're melodramatic by birth.
For sure. That reminds me, your family had a background in like theater, correct?
Yes, my dad acted. His parents acted. He's a writer. He hasn't had anything published yet, in part because he kind of got screwed over by his agent, but that's his story to tell. I took drama. My brothers both took drama. We're all very dramatic people.
Hey, well, it translates well into your work and into this cast. Like, I love the little flourishes you do with your voices and stuff sometimes.
Thank you.
You're very welcome, good sir. Okay, then. So, this is a question for both of you, so you guys can decide who would like to answer. What made you fall in love with your craft?
Oh,
Gonna start heavy today, folks.
yeah. I don't know if I ever had an epiphany of, yes, this is my calling. It's just something I have always done. I know I've told the story in the past of how, cleaning out the closet years and years ago, I found this old poster from when I was like 3. And on the back was this just wild scrawl of Crayola marker. And I'm like, I have no idea what this is, but I know it meant something at the time. I was drawing and writing some epic tale that has been completely lost to time, but I know that's what I was doing then and there before I could even like accurately write for realsies. So it's just something I do. It's what I am.
Yeah, I dig that.
Yeah, I mean, as far as like, I've always had a fascination with radio and the people who host stuff on radio, and even like just multimedia stuff in general. So I think that's kind of where I've been just drawn to, was like, I wanted to do something like that. I've always kind of
So you've been drawn to
admired and looked up
frequency?
to people who did like, radio and even some video stuff. Like I do know that like I have a long ago like a video of, we used to have this old video camera that used VHS tapes, and I used to walk around with it and like narrate things And like there's a video of me narrating my house, and I was like 7, 8, 9 years old, just wandering around with the camera, just talking about the stuff. Just talking about the stuff around my house.
Yeah.
So that was that's one of those goofy things, and that's one thing I've always been drawn to. And I always used to listen to like radio and stuff, and be like, I would email because it was the 90s, and like the hosts actually did have email, so you could email them and talk to them. And I always used to like do that with some of the local radio DJs. It's very goofy, very like 90s sort of thing. Just learning about people, learning about the people who I'd listen to and talk to them and stuff. It was really neat.
No, it's a wonderful thing. From what you said with radio, I'd say you're in tune with it. Also, pardon my flubs. The other thing thank you. The other thing I was going to say, though, for sure is like, no, there's like great importance in recording things because it's like how we pass on that continuity in a way. Naturally, we can do it with writers, and I've got a whole spiel with that later. But like, it's a very important thing, and I'm happy to see it like with what you're doing.
Well, thank you.
Oh, you're super welcome. Thank you for answering. Now, let's see. I think question 3 kind of goes into that, so you guys both answered. Now, this one's probably a little bit more Ian. When you're creating, like, naturally you're creating different things. If it's IP work like Sonic, or what you've done for Turtles or Aether, you're going to have different drives because the person who owns that is going to dictate a bit. But when you're creating from your heart, like, what inspires you?
Part of it is the enthusiasm to tell a story. Maybe it's a particular scene or scenario, and I want to investigate it. So who are these characters? Why are they having this interaction? What is motivating them to say these things? Where did that motivation come from? And there's stories to be had in there. And then you explore those stories, and that creates a foundation for more questions. And as you follow up on those questions, more stories spin out from there. And it's a never ending process. And then you have this whole world that has been built up around you. And less wholesomely, spite. Because as you said, with licensed work, there are folks who have their own visions for the product and their own directions for it. And even media that I haven't contributed to myself, it's like, I really wish they had done this way or gone in this direction. And if I had done it my way, and it's like, well, by the time you parse that all out, you might as well just do your own thing rather than try to revise something else. You know, you want to see something in the world, make it. So that's what I try to do.
Well, firstly, thank you. I think that's beautiful. That's kind of like how creativity is a conversation. That's something I'd want to talk about later. But I definitely like that answer. That like dovetails into something else too. Dealing with negativity. You were just talking about that. Now, this is a slight different thing, but I think it's a story everyone's familiar with. Ian, you've earned some names here and there on the internet, ones that, aren't true, but people say anyway. In a more serious question though, how do you deal with like negativity that comes your way? I know the natural response is like ignore it, but like some of the time it's impossible to ignore, especially when it's all over your timeline. And I ask this both as someone who, if I stay in this field, I think that might come my way, but also just as a general tool for people to deal with, like when they feel like they're being dogpiled or, afflicted in that way.
Yeah. I mean, part of it is I grew up bullied. Like I was in a very small class in a school that continuously taught from pre-K to graduation. So I knew the same people for my entire childhood, and our pecking order was established in kindergarten. And that's a long time to deal with the same bull crap. And once I graduated, there was a kind of moment where I realized, oh, I'm out of that bubble. Those people don't matter anymore. I can strike out in my own way and meet new people. And that's when I started to see some of the same trends and bullying exists even in the adult world. And that put it in a context of, oh, there's always going to be jerks. There's always going to be people who are consistently negative or too focused on themselves to see the damage that they're doing, and so on and so forth. I don't want to play armchair psychiatrist for all of humanity here, but I realize that there will always be those that are trying to tear you down. And even then, it's very hard to develop a thick skin because I want to be liked. We talked about the theatrical nature earlier. I like being on stage. I like presenting and putting myself out there to people. And in return, I want to be enjoyed. I want to entertain. It's an incredibly addictive transaction, to put yourself out there and then to receive positive feedback. And it's like, oh, that feels good. Let me continue to entertain. Let me continue to perform. Yes, continue to like back and forth. And it's great because they're entertained. You feel like you're something. It goes on and on. But there will always be folks who, don't enjoy what you do. And there are those out there that will have a valid critique or a dissenting opinion that is valid, that you need to take in and consider, because no one is going to be able to perceive every possible connotation of what they're doing. None of us are flawless. And sifting that out from the rest of the detritus is a learned skill. And you have to go through the muck to get it. It's also something to learn over time, is what environments you're in. Certain online portals are more conducive to constructive feedback, while others are more inclined to sensationalize. And it's not just the negative contributors, but those who feel like it's great fun to dunk on them or to retweet or to post it on the timeline going, hey, look at what this guy said. Isn't that dumb? It's like, I wouldn't know about it if you hadn't put it in front of me. Yes, I'm sure that turd stinks. Don't push it under my nose. Thank you. It's well intentioned, I know, but
smelly. Yeah, no thanks.
And to a degree, it's understanding the perspectives and coming to learn how certain individuals or certain little microcosms of the internet have a very dedicated view of something, which is not founded in anything other than their own headcanon. Yeah. And you cannot appease that mentality. You cannot cater to it because they are demanding a product that has never been there and that you are not capable of producing due to the various factors that go into any kind of IP work. So little by little, it's learning to recognize what is just hate for being hateful sake, what is misguided because they have their opinion fed to them by a YouTube channel, by folks who don't have the personal media literacy to understand what's going on, and then those who are actually forming a critique or just have different tastes and are saying, I don't care for this. They're not tearing you down necessarily. They're not saying the product itself is inferior. They're just saying, this isn't for me. And that is a valid opinion to have and put out there so that you go, okay, why is that? What about that doesn't appeal to you? And is there something that we could do to accommodate everybody here? Or is it just, this isn't your cup of tea and we'll serve up something else down the line? No harm, no foul there.
Yeah.
And another thing, and this is something I still am working on myself, is get offline.
Oh boy.
Like the 24/7 fire hose of input, good or bad, is not healthy. I've managed to cultivate a reasonably positive feed on some of my socials, but even then, if it's just cheering, oh, this was brilliant every time, that isn't constructive. I'm glad they're entertained.
Yeah.
I'm humbled that they think so highly of the material, but that isn't nurturing. It's just telling me, okay, you liked it. And that's good.
Yeah.
But I don't want to read too much into that. And I don't ever want to take the lesson, oh, I have achieved perfection, because that's never the case.
No. At that point, it becomes coddling, and like it curtails you from that opportunity to grow from things that could be a mistake or seeing those alternate perspectives, correct?
Yeah. And it's dangerous because the higher the pedestal I am put on, the farther the fall is going to be.
Oh boy.
Something's going to happen somewhere where, the rose-tinted glasses fall off. I am no longer somebody's hero and they're going to be devastated. And I dread that for everybody involved. That's why I
never become Donkey Kong. That's why I try to stress the humble side here in the podcast persona, is that I ain't perfect. I am a deeply flawed individual. Do not look to me as a role model or hero or anything. If you enjoy my work, I'm very glad. If you can learn from it and take lessons from it, awesome.
I'm glad to have contributed to that. But don't hold me in such high regard that you're willing to, die on the internet front lines. It ain't worth it. So I guess to sum it up, there are jerks everywhere, and it just comes with time to learn how to roll off of their bile and find what is truly important in your life and focus on that.
For sure. Well, thank you. I think having a good community is part of that and a good mindset. And you're definitely like, as me, as an outsider looking in, like you have both of those. But let's see. Another question from my fellow North Carolinian. So,
Hey, wait,
yay.
where were you from?
I was from Havelock, North Carolina. I went to ECU. I know you went to UNCG because my brother went there.
Oh, hey, go Spartans.
Hey, they're pretty chill. So let's see. Going back to earlier, create what I had written down was creation as a dialogue. Like this kind of goes into my personal wording of it, and I think you got into that a little bit where you were talking about you see what someone's doing and you wish you could go in an alternate direction and that inspires you to create something. Or when somebody says they don't vibe with the work and you ask why, like the dialogue isn't where it's a monologue, like you're just talking at someone when somebody takes in media, when they take in reading or like a show or even our podcast, that reaction to it is very telling, and that's the response that like we can all learn from in a way. But in that greater conversation, what is one thing that you would like to see in the world, like as an effect of your work?
As an effect of my work.
Like we all create for a reason, I would say. Like you said, that's just intrinsic in you. I might be like putting it on too high on a pedestal, but like
I wouldn't be so bold as to think, oh, something I've written will change the world. But
not in such a big way, but someone's life maybe.
More than once at a convention, I've had parents come up and say, my child was behind in their reading ability. And then they found a Sonic comic I worked on, and that clicked for them. That motivated them to learn to read and catch up and reach the level that they're supposed to be at, even exceeding in some places. And that is extremely validating. Even if it's just those 5 people I have talked to over the years, that is tremendous. And I'm very proud of that. Beyond that, I just want to entertain. I want you to be able to escape from the world for just a few minutes, get lost in whatever narrative I have crafted, and come away from it feeling something, maybe relief, maybe sorrow, maybe something. But I feel like the emotional impact that we receive from the media we consume is a different intensity than the real world. Even the sorrow and the anger that the media we consume, the ones that it elicits in us, I feel like is not as damaging as what we experience in the real world. There's that detachment knowing that it is just make believe. Or I hope you understand that detachment. That's another issue. But it allows us to feel these things in a safer, more controlled environment, I guess.
Yeah.
And
I've heard somebody. Oh, my bad.
No, I'm kind of just rambling.
No, you're good. I think I've heard someone compare it to like inoculation, if you wanted to say that. But like even the idea of pathos, like in the, I think that was an ancient Greek term, ethos, pathos, logos, where it's like letting out the emotions from that work is very important. And like even then, like the work can be a good way to like frame how people learn their morals or what's important to them. So I think that's a very important thing as well.
Sure. And there's also a degree of being able to enjoy the negative emotions. Like you wouldn't enjoy the loss of a family member, clearly, but seeing a character go through the grief and come out stronger on the other side, it can break your heart. But maybe I'm being weird, but there's that kind of beautiful sadness where you're allowed to feel sad and you enjoy feeling that way because it feels earnest, but it isn't really haunting you because you haven't lost anything.
Yeah. I don't think you're being weird at all. Like this whole thing would have stuck around if it wasn't a real thing in a way.
I think you're weird, Ian, but that's just me.
Thank you.
Thank you, Kyle.
I have no real room to judge. I'm just as weird, if not weirder. It's fine.
Don't worry.
We're all mad here, Alice.
Hey. Alrighty. Well, let me see. I'm going to pause my prepared questions just because I do want time to actually dig into your work a little bit and have a dialogue about that if it's chill.
Yeah, sure.
Go for it.
Your show, your pace.
Hey, much appreciated. Let's see. I think I'll start off with what everybody's waiting for. the famous blue video game character you worked on, Mega Man.
There we go. Yeah,
Heck
yeah.
yeah.
I remember
Speaking
him.
Heck
of
yeah.
speaking of which, that new Mega Man imprint is supposed to be coming out at some point. Would we happen to get a knowing smile about that? Hmm?
Uh, see, these people read so much into the knowing smile these days. It's kind of become
Mm-hmm.
less of the venting opportunity and more of setting expectations. So
Oh,
it would
okay.
certainly be delightful if something were announced one day in the near future, but
Mm-hmm.
one can only speculate at such a thing.
All right, folks, fire up your blue skies.
It's the first time
Ian Flynn is replacing the knowing smile.
I'm
Okay.
hearing this.
We got to
Mr.
divest,
Flynn.
folks.
I can't tell you everything, Kyle. You need plausible deniability.
Yes, I know. Thank you for not telling me. But still, it's like,
Hashtag
oh,
knowledgeable smirk. All right.
interesting.
Okay. So the one I wanted to talk about was number 50, The Choice. I had to jot that down just so I could get it earlier. But it's one that really examines X and Rox's attitudes. Like, I followed your Sonic work more than your Mega Man work, but I really like this one because I think it emphasized a thing you don't get in the video games very often, where in comics you get time to sit down and breathe with the characters and have more introspection because the games are more action packed and you're trying to embody the characters for a bit. Naturally, that's not going to happen as often. But I liked how it was like a really quick way to both address their backstories and contrast the characters against each other in a very fun way. One of the things that really stood out to me was when you introduced Rock's function as a drive, like the fact that he wanted to protect the peace there, and the inherent contradiction in that. Even though he's a robot who's not supposed to have free will, that X factor, he still displays it in like advocating for doing that. It wasn't Light's idea, but additionally, like he's fighting so that there will be peace for his fellow robot masters and for his family. And that kind of goes into the hardship that eventually X inherits. I thought that was a really nice kind of poetic angling to it.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Let's see. I know this is ancient history and you might not remember everything in your intent back then. The last thing there was also X's whole thing, and I thought you did a good job of explaining why he wasn't playable in the games, but in a way that like addressed the narrative, and even then how Rock inspired him even in the present, where he was like, "Well, maybe if I wasn't created, I wouldn't be able, or a lot of these problems wouldn't exist." But then they talk about like, "Oh, well, you don't want to do that because you don't know what other problems are there, and we need somebody else to protect," like what Rock said to him. And likewise, I like the little nod about polluting the time stream. It made me remember the DCAU stories. If you ever watched like Batman, the animated series and stuff.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Well, I bet you're pretty familiar with Batman now. But let's see. But like, no, my end notes there was it was a very existential question from X. It dealt a lot with guilt and his desire for greater good. He's not questioning the validity of his existence so much as his whether his being does more harm than good. Like I think there was a quote from Proto Man in one game where he's like, I don't know what it really means to be born with a weapon as part of myself, but I'm trying to find that answer. And I think that kind of spirit got carried well into X in that piece. I don't know if that was a thing you were intentionally doing. I just thought it was cool. But overall, it was a very sweet story with like a lot of familiar bonding and ironies. So I thought it was a fun interaction and a real reason why having these comics based on games is really good because it allows people to attach to these characters on a whole new layer.
Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
I knew with this particular instance, because there is such a stark divide between Classic and X, that having these two in the same room at the same time is something to capitalize on.
Mm-hmm.
And then because I really wanted to be as faithful to the source material as I could, I knew it wasn't going to stick. So let's make sure this moment lasts in its own right before we hit the cosmic reset button and go back to the status quo.
I thought it was really cool, and I think you capitalized on that opportunity well. Again, just as a reader saying that. So, but we'll switch over from Mega Man to something that's a little different, Claus McGee. So you might not know this, but a long time ago, I asked you about the Jangle Bell on one of the YouTube episodes, like the hum and the noise and all that. Yeah. So the whole thing there, I read through both the issues that are currently out, the ones that you, Jonathan Griffiths, and Reggie Graham are working on, and is available on the Bumble King website, correct?
That is correct. You're such a well-read scholar. Handsome, too.
Aw, shucks. I try, just a trifle. But in my scholaring, I've also learned, let's see. So Claus has his 9 lives. All 9 lives were revealed. We got the adventurer, pirate, squire, librarian, researcher, wizard, unhoused person, overlord, king, and grandpa. And let's see. I like one of the things I really liked. You have a penchant for a lot of names, and this is a thing I'll dig into when we get to the Dragoon section. But like you have funny names like Alhad, Polly the Parrot, Don Quixote, and Know It All. So that was good. This is clearly skews to a very younger audience, I think. So I
Oh,
thought
yeah.
that was very nice. But one thing I noticed, like this is just me trying to pick up and trying to pick apart. So the character of Russell the Squire, like he's there early on, but in the second one, Russell is mentioned, but there's two L's in his name. And there's a very specific inconsistency in that spelling. I don't think it's a typo, so I'm wondering if that's a lead up to something there.
You're very kind. No, that's a typo. I need to fix that
Oh
when we
no!
format it for the trade.
Oh, well, it's all good. I guess, I've just overanalyzed. Uh,
No, and this is one of the things when you were talking about feedback and people's perceptions of things. You gave me the benefit of the doubt, saying, "Oh, that isn't a simple error. That must be intentional." And
mhm.
then that feedback, if I hadn't, dropped my hand and said, "No, you got me," that could have been an opportunity for me to go, no, there are two Russells, and the double L means something else. Clever of you to
That's his
untangle
rebirth
this knot
version.
so early. But I want to be honest with you. No, it's just me screwing up the name.
Uh, you're good. Well, thank you for that honesty. I do appreciate that. But like one of the other things is it's very clear that McGee isn't the only one who is like affected by this rebirth cycle though. Because like Merlin's one of the first people, he's like the principal for Yarny. And then let's see, I think a few other people had their names dropped, but I can't quite remember. But I did like the frog recurring as a thing. I thought that was a very cute background gag. One of the other things is dragons seem to be really common in the fantastical past of that world, or other lives if they're like parallel universes. We don't know quite yet, but let's see. I did like the little moment where Claus was talking about, his spouse and like what had happened, and it kind of addressed like what we thought was just a funny rivalry. Like, no, this is a thing I kind of regret, and you get to see a little bit of the pain that Claus was living with at that time.
Yeah, it's, like you said, it's definitely skewed to younger readers. It's meant to be more of a lighthearted adventure, but I feel like comedy excels when there is just that little dash of drama or tragedy in there to act as not the foil, but the juxtaposition of the two. You have this whole Tom and Jerry bit between him and Clover, and then you have the very grounded realization of where it comes from, which doesn't undermine any of the antics you see beforehand, but it tells you, oh wait, there is something driving this story forward. So you come for the haha, but you stay for the, oh, what's that next little story nugget you're going to drop? You're building a line here. Let me follow the line and laugh at all the things along the way.
For sure. And it was very entertaining. I This is the part where I can say this isn't what I usually come to Ian Flynn for, but I can still admire some competent writing. So thank you for making those. I look forward
Thank
to
you
the
for the
next one.
appraisal.
Hey, it's no problem. That in 2 cents will get somebody maybe on a boat. Now, let's see. One of the things, though, so now I'm going to go back into my neck of the woods a bit. TMNT. For IDW, I know you worked on the ones based on the 2012 cartoon, but you also worked on the mainline IDW too in TMNT universe, correct?
Yep.
Yep, the service animal stories, which were in 19 and 20 of that line. So here's I'm going to switch it to myself for just a second. For me, I only got my break in this year working with Gigi because they had an issue for Black, White, and Green #1. And, we wound up working on a story for Raphael. And it was a story that, taught me a lot about making comics in a more serious capacity. And Gigi actually has a really good section where they talk about their experiences, how they leaned on you and Evan a little bit that they posted on Tumblr. And I felt like I learned even more, even though, they guided me through some of the finer points of refining paneling and stuff like that, or like how to direct for paneling. But for that one, it was one where we wanted to call back because it was the 40th anniversary. For yours, I felt like it was a very nice expansion of what was already there. And like you did that very well with, in my estimation. with Alepex and Raphael. And a lot of your work has a really good character juxtaposition. Like if there are two characters, you're going to see how they contrast very quickly. One of the examples I point to is Foreign and Wind, like in the very start of Working Stiffs. And then I
Mhm.
point to this because here you see Raphael is like very eager to get to action, and Alepex is the one who is more mindful of things like, oh, well, you need to watch the cameras or you need to have your smoke screen. And then when they're going through the facility, you see that Alepex is the one to pick up on, hey, there are tire marks here, or this is likely the room we need to go into. So it already establishes like Raphael's very gung ho, something that almost anyone who's seen TMNT would know, whereas Alepex is more analytical. But I like the way that you did a lot of the detailing too. One of the ones was when they're like chasing like all the missing animals. They had the whole purchase and paper trail thing. And then as I was reading, it was like, hey, why is this an element? And then later on, it's explained like, well, it's easier just to do, or it was an element where, which was it? I remember reading it. So there was a purchase and paper trail. I'm gonna say that I believe that the company bought them, but it's because they had very predictable sequencing. It could have been no, no, no. I apologize. I'm gonna tip my
No,
hand.
yeah, it's been a while since I even worked on it. I think it was that they bought all the animals legitimately because you didn't look into it if there seemed to be a legitimate paper trail,
Yeah,
or
like
like if it was if they had stolen them, then oh, that's kind of odd. Why do that? But if it's just a mass
yeah,
purchase, sure, the mass purchase is odd. But if it's covered just the right way, you don't really think too much about it because hey, it's all legal, nothing wrong here,
very
right?
true. Yeah, I
I
mean,
think that's
animal
how it went.
testing is sadly a thing, but like, no, definitely. I had a little note there about it, but I was trying to search because I remember Zodi had a whole conversation with them about it, and it had just slipped me. So I apologize about that flub. But one of the things I think that was really nice was seeing like the whole point where empathy was used well, and you see that contrasted with Zodi and Krisa because Zodi just brushes it off because it's like, hey, I'm one of the bosses, I can just do what I want. Whereas Krisa is like more new, and even though they're a Python, I believe, it was a whole thing where Raphael had to convince Alapix to like give her a chance to like make a turn because that's what Alapix tried earlier. I thought that was really good. I also like the way that the homunculi, like the little servant people within that company, were like made to be a little scary because you saw Raphael manhandling them and it barely did a thing. And that's just one of the little peons there. So I thought that was a really good setter right there. I like that. I like the hall navigation where it was very visual focused. There were no words. You just let the body language and the imagery tell the story, which is like a really important skill within comic making. I thought that was really good, along with showing like the friction and synergy that Raphael and Alapix had. So that's my thoughts there.
Very cool.
Oh, thank you. Sorry, not as much to dig into on that one, but it was very nice to read your work on it.
Thank you. I remember being very intimidated by it because I wasn't doing an arc. I was doing a one off.
Mm-hmm.
And this is Ninja Turtles. How
Yeah,
much do you contribute without just taking the wheel and going, haha, my direction now. I wanted to honor everything that was coming before. I wanted to make it integral to whatever was coming after, but I wasn't in the position to make a big executive decision narrative wise. So it's like, okay, what do I do that is a meaningful story that isn't necessarily something that everyone's going to have to read after me for it to make sense. I
yeah.
wanted to contribute without overbearing.
I think that's fair. I think you did the best thing you could, which is like a deeper dive into the relationships of these characters. Because if you can't change the plot, you can highlight those very important things. It goes back to what you said about like foils or juxtaposition. So,
Mm-hmm.
like, I think that's good. You're just giving people more of what they like. Let's see. If we're talking about character work, this is a very brief pivot. One of the ones from, I don't have the exact number, but this was when Surge went to join the Resistance along with Kit, and there was something that like was caught me in one of the panels that I'm wondering if was very intentional. I'd like to think it was. So there's a bit when Surge is handing back the Wispon, right? And Whisper's giving her the stink eye about it. But the way it's done, the Wispon has the barrel pointed at Surge, and Surge naturally is somebody who likes to kick the beehive a little bit. I was just thinking the intentional angle there where the way it was handed back, you were trying to convey something about like Surge's character and like what she dares others to do, correct?
Yeah, like that was part
Yeah,
of her scheme is that she knows she's already not liked. She knows Whisper has a beef with her, So rather than try to say, oh no, we're all good now, she's leaning into the hatred. She says, here,
Yeah.
take your gun back. It's ready to fire if you want to just be a scumbag about it. I dare you to do it. Come on.
Yeah.
Go with it. Give in to that anger that I love to give into so much. Do it, do it, do it, do it, do it. No, that was absolutely
Yeah.
intentional.
Well, I love that. You know, she's definitely going to be feeling that because of just the way that fight went. But also, it's like Whisper is kind of war hardened in a way, as much as you can be in Sonic. So it's a thought, I would think. One of the things, though, is like I definitely did enjoy like seeing how the rivalries were addressed and like Sonic's whole idea of, well, you know, obviously we can't 100% trust her, but we need to give her a chance. And then like how Amy communicates that in that way. I thought was very nice. The one thing that made me wonder was at the very end when Kit was like, "Is Tails also a target?" or something to that effect. We know that Surge's whole thing with Sonic is very, very ingrained, but Kit is more. I'm here to back up Surge, and like when you see that very often, like you know, he's been more passive in interactions with Tails, so it's still making me figure out like how his relationship is formed other than what came out in the annual, which kind of confirms that. But since that's recent, I'm not going to talk about it too much. I feel like it's a very interesting look at both their dynamics to the characters they're meant to counteract.
There's that, and with Kit and Tails specifically, you know, Tails, instead of beating Kit outright, kind of like how Sonic did to Surge, he talked him down. He tried to reach out and be a friend, or at least a friendly gesture. You know, we don't have to be friends, but we don't have to be enemies either. You know, let's just bring it down a notch. And, you know, telling him, you know, I'm so sorry that Surge was lost. You know, you have friends here. We will support you. And then, oh no, Surge was alive. And so
And he felt lied to.
in Kit's mind, the first person outside of Surge to show him any amount of empathy or support or kindness lied to him to deny him access to the one person he holds above all others in the world. That is a sin he will never forgive.
Oh, and we're seeing that, all right. But I think that's very fun. Well, fun as it can be, but I enjoy both these characters. I'm excited to see where Evan takes them, and I'm liking where you took them. So now we get to the piece de resistance. Back to Drogoon.
Yes! Finally, the show can begin.
Yes, yes.
Yes.
All right. This goes back to talking about pieces from the heart, and I'm going to have to like do a peel back where I'm going to switch it to me for a little bit. One of the things that I've heard a lot, both from you and other people who do work on Sonic, is that a lot of the time working on it can overshadow your other efforts. And it's a thing where it feels very double edged because even as someone who's very barely made it in comics, it's something where it's like, that would be really awesome to do. But at the same time, I see like things that everyone's working on and like they hold to their heart. And, you know, obviously you're going to have your own creative ambitions, your own things that drive you, but it's harder when you feel like that doesn't get seen a lot. Like if I was talking about great things I think everybody made, let's see, John naturally has Time Trouble and Chip and Walter. Shout out John Gray, always love the guy. Let's see, Dan Barnes has Endless Fantasia. Gigi has their series Eternally Red, which they're working on. Then, you know, everybody else might have things that I'm not as versed on. But it's one of those things where for you, I believe Drogoon is that passion project. You said as much, right?
Yeah, Drogoon it's not all the eggs in one basket, but it's most of the eggs.
Mm-hmm. And like from what I've seen, it looks like all your hallmarks are in there. Now, folks, please don't get mad, but Ian has references in his work. References to Arthurian myth, to A Midsummer's Night Dream, a little bit of Star Wars, stuff like that. Am I correct, good sir?
Yeah, Drogoon is kind of the melting pot of things that I've always wanted to work on or work with, or just the broader ideas that I find are cool and play with all the toys. Like, I want to do this sort of thing. Well, it's mine. I can do that.
Well, I've been happy to see that how this toy box works so far. I think you and Adam Bryce Thomas have been doing some really good work. One of the things I was going to point out, like very quickly, was I think I mentioned it before, but the body language and dialogue was really strong. Like when they run into the Kyranid, the giant bat monster. One of the big things is like you immediately see like the responses and Wins is to fight and Florence is to run. It's in that same panel. You see that both in like this way that ABT put Win up front and then Foreign in the back, but also it kind of communicates a lot too. Like the dialogue was already doing that beforehand. when we get those little moments with them, with Jobun, and with Lizzie. And one of the things was like Jobun's whole, well, this auto hold when it comes to the like past that they said they had. But I like that. I liked how ABT like foreshadowed the Carinid. Like you barely see it in that one panel, but they're hiding under like the overgrown ship. And immediately the scene is set. You get an idea of like this must have been here for it to be overgrown. Then it's like, oh, Ajay are supposed to be good at climbing. You put all this world building right in there very quickly. I think you do a pretty good job of exposition and like pithy dialogue at the same time. Not to make this into a compliment fest, but I'm just trying to learn a little bit.
Well, no, I do really appreciate that in this instance because I stress over the first book, every page, every exchange, to the point where we've, more or less thrown it out and we're doing it over from scratch with the For Realsies volume that is hopefully going to be out this spring.
Hey.
But it's that fine line to walk where they need to sound natural. They need to sound like this is how they would talk to each other in their own world, in their own context. But it can't be so dense that the reader is like, what does this mean? This has no context. It's just gobbledygook. And
For sure.
finding that right note is just terrifying, especially out of the gate. Once book one is done and in and you've read it, you know what the world is like, the cadence, the characters, their interactions. We can be a little more free with it and just flow. But that first one, everything has to be established. The world, the mood, the themes, the cadences, the nervous tics, the biases, everything has to be there. And it's the way they live their lives, but it can't just be purely within their worldview because we don't know what that is because it's not real. And so yes, I'm very happy that it came across for you.
Well, thank you. I'm just trying hard to be able to tell a slab from a quarryman and the roots below from the stars above. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
One of the
I'm picking up what you're putting down.
If you know, you know.
Nice.
But I really like that. Hey, thank you. And I think the science fantasy element is like really blended too. Like wands would be visually you're supposed to connect those to like laser guns, but the way that it works, they have the charge, things like that. And that adds tension because it's like, oh, we got to get this ready for this fight, things like that. Then of course you have the part where I believe Trends of Bozeman shows up, and we get a little bit more history on the Ajay and how Galaxant has kind of subjugated them a bit. And then you see that tension in the whole talk between Foreign and Trends, if I remember correctly.
Oh yeah.
But yeah. So one of the things I was going to say was the story very consistently informs the audience, but like we were talking about before, it's very organic in that way. And I did like the way that the realms of Galaxant are there because you use the Heim terminology. It's supposed to go back to Yggdrasil and Norse myth, if I'm correct. Was that the inspiration for that?
Yep.
So, but no, it's a very fun blend. I especially like how the ley lines also bring to mind the hyperdrive in Star Wars. Like, when they do that whole thing with the Millennium Falcon.
There's a little bit of that. It's more directly inspired by the gateways out of Cowboy Bebop.
Oh, dang, then I need to brush up.
Which I would imagine also took inspiration from the Star Wars hyperlane, so you're not wrong. But,
Yay.
Just
I appreciate that.
While we're peeling back layers and exposing what's beneath.
Just promise me Lassie isn't going to go, Spike Spiegel! And we're good.
Now, if that happens, you have my permission to drag me out behind the shed and put me out of my misery.
Thank you. It would be hard to carry that weight, but I'll try.
I am a big fella.
Hey, me too. You're all good. But let's see. One of the things, though, I really like this, and I was talking about it before. The way that the children's book tells us about Galaxant, but also tells us about Wind, because Wind's direct edits to the book, and then the whole conversation that was had between Florin and Wind after the fact. They're like talking about how that's proliferated all over. And this kind of goes back to what you said about things that people read can kind of affect them in a way. Like you talked about a positive interaction your work had where parents told you about it. You can think how being kind of inducted with this information might have a negative effect for like the humes in the setting towards like other groups of people. And it's something to be mindful of, especially when you intentionally have a cast that's a very blended family kind of thing. Because you have people from 3 backgrounds in this one, but it seems very open. And I thought that was a very good intentional look at things because they'd all be considered marginalized in some way in this setting.
Yep.
But going back to that though, one of the things I was going to talk about was also Yorick. We don't happen to know him well, but I have a sneaking suspicion, and please ignore me if this is a spoiler. One thing I noticed is Yorick's eye never opens and he has a wish sash. And we have two characters here who are already hiding themselves. So it makes me think that Yorick is either also one of the people who's like of Drogoon or like Ambru from Elton.
You're very observant.
Well, I try. Thank you, Ian.
You.
But like, you know,
Uh-oh.
but I like that. I like the lingo for like gladiators. Like, let's see, we got the quarrymen and the slabs. It's a good way to lean into the whole tensions that the people have. And I thought that was neat. But it's also one of those things where it's like it's a perfect room to dig in. It seems like everything happens at Ruby Point, and you know, it feels like a hub that we might visit more than twice now.
Maybe part of this is, you know, as the story goes on, it's like, okay, I need a setting for this. Where are they? What is this setting? What does it mean? And initially, Ruby Point was meant to not really be that important of a setting. It was just a port town.
Mm-hmm.
And then when we were working on Outlaw, it's like, well, I don't want to reinvent an entire new region because we're doing this super fast to meet a deadline. I want to, you know, spare Adam some precious time. We'll just put it back in Ruby Point because we've already been there. He should be able to, you know, take whatever thoughts and plans he had for it in the one and apply it to the other. And the man just works nonstop. He's a creative dynamo. So he ended up coming up with a whole new direction for it anyway. And because of that, you now have two instances of Ruby Point. So you would think, oh, this must be an important location if we're going to visit it in two different titles, two different ways. And it's like unintentional, but I see where you come from with that. And does that mean now to reconsider and make Ruby Point something more? And that goes back to your earlier point, the conversation. And how does that affect and develop the work?
I think that's honestly such a great thing because like works are going to evolve as they live and as a person like takes in new things too. And I think that you and ABT like made the most of that. One of the things though is I definitely liked the backdrop of the gladiator contest. Like it's a big crowd, nobody's gonna notice if two people talk to each other, things like that. And I thought it was really cool. But that goes into the last 2 points I'll make for working stiffs before I move on. One of the things I really liked was that it was clear that Wind wanted answers, but not so desperately. But there's this thing where that kind of feels like a facade because in a flash, you know, her care for her ancestry seems to come up and you see how important it is. Whereas if we contrast that to how some of the people in Galaxon are, and this isn't in this section, but it's in a later section. I commented on it how their battleship looks like an axe of all things. That kind of brought Animorphs to mind because they had an axe ship there, but it looks visually like the weapon here. And that already brings to mind, like, you know, the idea of attacking something. But it's the fact that they seem that they're intent on ravaging other cultures. Like, one of the things is the recurring joke of don't eat the Nuremheim people because they're fish, but that's very literal dehumanization. There's like a kind of dismissive nature to ruling structures of other cultures like the Ajay or Titania's people, things like that. And you get to see how they've kind of mined these people to be useful to themselves in Arcturus. So like there's no doubt they're gonna do the same to like, you know, Win and Lassie's history if they get that opportunity. So like even though they're kind of fighting to survive, there's also a fight for preservation in this way too. Like resistance against that cultural domination. I thought that was a very interesting thing to go into.
And it's especially a sore spot for Wind because that mining has already happened. The Drogoon are the ideological foundation for Galaxon's right to rule. You know, we can consume everything by divine right. The Drogoon said so. And the two living Drogoon who are hiding on the fringe, barely scraping by, don't dare say, no, he didn't, because they might disappear if they get caught.
Yeah.
And just the fundamental injustice of that drives Wind up the freaking wall.
For sure. And like I think you see it in the scene where they're all being interrogated very early on. Like it's not as pointed because we're just getting to know them, but I feel like that's a strong exampling of that. Would you agree? Would you disagree?
Oh, yeah. And
One
you
of the
really
sorry,
feel
go ahead, go
Wind's
ahead.
frustration because if it were just up to her, she would go off the handle, go out in a blaze of glory. But the
Oh,
crew needs her. Lissy needs her, so she has to keep herself restrained. And that just salt on the wound.
I feel that. I think that comes up when the other knight shows up in the preview, but I'm not going to spoil too much for the people who get to enjoy it fresh and new. The very last thing there. One of the things you mentioned, how the discovery of the ancient Egyptian archaeologists who like just learned about older cultures before them. So we only learn about that culture because they learned about that culture. But there's so much that could be lost, and that is something you related back to your work. It reminds me of one of the videos by the YouTuber Jacob Geller, if you've heard of him, where he talks about after a city is buried and like how different civilizations will just build on top of each other in like very curious ways. So it's like that kind of tapestry in a way. You could also relate that back to mythology, which is like storytelling and like a little bit of faith, you know. But like that also kind of ties into this too, because these ideas of these characters and these lessons are kind of inherited and morphed in all these different ways. Like how we talk about inspiration, like how you're talking about inspiration here. I'm not saying like it's the exact same thing, but it's basically a principle in that way, I would say.
I would agree.
Yeah, I apologize. I kind of tied 2 points together there, so it's kind of
What?
messy. But, you know, as you said, sometimes we ramp. So one of the things I observed was where Working Stiffs was about a team and family and like the idea of unity because these characters get by together. Outlaws feels like it's very much more focused on independence and isolation, or like a fear of, you know, having to rely on somebody else. Because like this is our first time we see an enchantee like up front. It's at Ruby Point, and there's the whole Dream Chaser ship. But one of the things that stood out to me, if we're going to give ABT his flowers, was like the really striking juxtaposition between Ombru and the other Aj, well, the Aj character for this one. But we see like very much there's internal conflict there with Ombru, like learning to rely on other people when a core lesson was you can't rely on anyone. And I felt like Echo was kind of leaning on the fourth wall at points. I can't point to a specific section, but I just remember jotting that one down. But I think the story like was very good on talking about the in group and out group and like the interesting use of heresy there. But like, you know, that fits with the science fantasy of it all.
Yep, yep. If you really want to boil down the motivations of the two principal characters and why personally I think that it resonates so immediately is that Wind is looking for her home. You know, she has her found family. They have their ship and their routine, but she's looking for home, both the literal Drogenheim and her people on a more thematic way, and the answers behind it. It's that longing to belong somewhere. And Ambru's story, which we only get a glimpse at, it's more he's looking for his family because he is very alone. And it's very hard to be alone. And his journey is finding his place with others and what it means to be connected to others. And I feel both are a kind of fundamental, almost primal need that we all recognize.
I can definitely relate to that. And I think that's very fair because, like, if you have two characters do the exact same lesson, unless they take away wildly different things, it doesn't feel correct. So I'm glad that you're using Umbro to kind of like explore that angle. One of the things I wanted to follow up on, this is more of a question note that I had. My thought at first was that Umbro was another Drogoon, but there's no tail. And it was one of those situations that made me think about what York's status might be as well because even here, Echo talks about how much magic Umbro has, but at the same time, it's not really addressed other than I'm cursed. But like one of the things that I really took away from a more visual angle, as you gave us a deeper emotional and like thought provoking one, was this one was much more high action. And then it was like this kind of gives us a taste of responses that Lind and Lissy might face if it ever happens. And then even then they talk about mana relative to Drogoon or someone who's suspected to be one. Because Enchanti have high amounts, but not as much. So Umbro is suspected to be a Hume with high mana, not stated to be life force, so it's likely a form of Drogoon. Like that goes back to the whole curse thing. Echo is a Narcissus reference, but very whimsical. I think that like contrasted very well to the more serious character. So maybe that goes a little bit more back to what you said for Claws.
Maybe. I'm
Could
so
be.
satisfied that you're picking up on these small intentional details. And even if you're not necessarily connecting the dots, especially since Outlaw's a single issue, you know that there's a line between them. And oh, that's just so nice.
Oh, thank you, Ian.
We did it right.
Martin?
Somebody got it. Somebody got it that it's there.
You did it, Ian. Good job.
I passed the media literacy test.
Thank you.
Huzzah.
Thank you. That's a
Oh,
rare
you're
test to
welcome.
pass these days.
I'm trying, but we all slip sometimes. One of the things, like, just more genuinely is like, I'm just personally, I love storytelling and I like telling stories. It's something where I really want to grow and something that I want to continually do. It's part of like why I did the teaching for a while, but it's also clear like some of the time in the school system, it's about getting people through, not digging into that passion. And different people have different passions, and like that's perfectly understandable. Heck, it's part of what makes life beautiful, but it's very difficult to see like something that I see as a very high art form reduced down to the most basic levels and made into a chore for people. And that can be crushing in its own way. One of the other things that was like, as I read these things, I try to actively learn from them so that hopefully I can get better at telling stories that I'd like to, or one day, tell a story more effectively. And, ultimately it's the joy of being a reader, and hopefully that translates into writing.
And the best way to grow that skill is just to do.
I'm trying out here, trust me. uh, I think you of all people, well, no, this goes into a whole other thing, but I think from people you've seen and just the state of how the industry, big quotes, and just general industry around the world is kind of very difficult. There are only so many opportunities when there's an overflow of talent. That's not me talking highly about myself. That's like a lot of people who are very skilled, who want
Oh,
to tell
sure.
these stories, who want to illustrate these things, who want to work on these video games. And they don't get that opportunity to shine because, various circumstances I won't go into. And it's very crushing to see. And, we always have the opportunity to tell these stories on our own. And that's something that I try to do also. But it's also hard when you don't have that infrastructure to build up so you can continually do this.
Hmm.
And,
Yeah.
sometimes that's just a consequence of the game. And hey, I signed up for this life. It's fine. But don't mean I can't complain about it once in a while as long as I'm doing something about it.
Yep.
But I'm in it to win it, but I'm already winning if I make something that makes people feel something.
Exactly. You don't have to have the George Lucas level of money and cultural
No,
impact. If you've reached an audience of 20 people and you've enriched their lives somehow, that's something.
for sure. It's one of those things. I don't trust me. I'm not in writing to get rich. That happens for one or two people, and that's cool. I just want to bring something to make people happier for reading it. Kind of like what you said. I would like
Yeah,
a slightly bigger stage, but I got to work to get there, so that's what I'm gonna do.
it would be nice if
Let's see.
writing paid the
Yeah.
bills.
Yeah.
I know, right? Man, we all can't be like the creator Pool Noodle. But let's see. Switching over real quick, just because I know time is limited. I'll do a little bit more about myself and some of the writing I'm doing. While I'm still trying to continue to work on TMNT, they're very busy right now. There's a whole new status quo, everything like that. My hope is one day I get to write for the Turtles again and, like, revisit that world and some of the things that are in there. So that way I can filter back some of my passion for those characters and hopefully coalesce with what everybody else is doing. But that's a hope. In the meantime, me and one of my co-creators, a collaborator named, he goes by Froglet Comics, his name is Mikey. We actually were working on a graphic novel and got the entire script done. That graphic novel is called The Outer Space. It's a middle grade story that's like, it's a supernatural one about children who develop ESP and have to deal with like some of the difficulties of navigating social situations while still being different. It's kind of a fantastical spin on what you related earlier about being a kid and feeling bullied. In this case, some of these kids also feel isolated, but they find community through each other. And, their abilities are just a backdrop to build upon that. But, I found great joy in creating that with him. And the hope is it's something that people can read someday soon. We'll see. There's no promises yet, but we're trying.
Hey, it isn't not happening until you stop working on it. Slow and steady and complete is still complete.
I really appreciate that. Aside from that, going back to the fantasy novel work, for me, there were two books I did. One that was straight out of college, which was called Desert Rain, that got published in 2017, I believe, 2016. And it was my first real effort because, I knew I wanted to write since I was 14. And it was one of those things where it's like it made me feel joy to like create and give voice to these characters and all these inspirations that would come from the things I saw. And I wouldn't say that's a masterpiece by any means. I was 23 at the time. So, like, there's a lot of fledgling elements there, some humming and hawing, but it was something that made me feel fulfilled because, like, I got to be a novelist. I got to write a whole world and, like, make it into a thing. And then a few years later, one of the second books I worked on came out. And that one, I was much more polished. I had been working as a teacher for a while. And then, like, it was something where it's like, I was putting to use all the things I was teaching others to remind myself. I had to go through that draft 2, 3 times. I was like, is this consistent? Is there a typo here? What do other people other than me think about this? Because I'm going to be blind to certain things. And it came out and it was something I was very proud of. Like, it wasn't a commercial success by any means, but I put my heart and my care into it. And it was one of those things where, like, have you ever had a moment where you hold something you worked on that used to just be a text document and you feel something from that?
Oh, every time I see it on the newsstand or the bookshelf or in the bookstore,
Hey.
it doesn't get old. It's been 20 years and it's like, oh, here I am in a physical document on a shelf where real people can touch it, maybe even buy it.
Oh boy. Well, hearing that, it makes me await Dr. Starline's glorious return. It's gonna rock, folks. But...
No.
Oh no!
I was about to say maybe he is my self-insert, and then you said that, and it's like no. Let us not rock. No rocking me. Thank you.
Do not rock. No. Starline.
You rock in an entire different way. Don't worry.
No need to get a little bolder in life.
Hey, I like it. Well, we'll bury that topic for now. Hey. There's a lot I can circle back to on there, but no, take it off the slate, please. Don't take these for granted. This is grade A material.
I know. Can't.
Oh, you. But no, it's one of those things where, like, just as a fledgling person in this field and someone who's still growing, it's been very nice to like get to learn from you, like right here, but also get to learn from others. Like, I would point to John Gray and Dan Barnes because they both were very helpful. Gigi very directly when I worked with them, and it was very amazing. And I hope to continue to learn as someone who reads, and hopefully as someone who puts out work in the future too. I look forward to what everyone in the BumbleKast extended universe, hi chat, wants to put out too, because I know everyone's working towards it.
And I wish you all the best effort and fortune and success and growth and all them positive vibes.
Thank you. Very last thing, unless like we've got too much, but very last. I believe before in an interview you said you felt like you had reached the mountaintop. My question is, what's the next mountain you want to climb?
Next to like being able to write for a Sonic game, Frontiers and Shadow Generations, those were the peak. That was going from, I like Sonic to, I have contributed to it in an official capacity. But in both of those instances, it was, here's the premise, and you fill in the center. Sonic is going to go on these islands. He's going to fight these titans. A supersonic Eggman has an AI daughter. Here's the parameters. Shadow Generations, Black Doom is coming back. It's going to be in white space. These are the NPCs that are going to show up. Here are the stages, such and such. And that's all fine. That's good. I like those parameters. I want to start at the base level. I want to be able to say, here is the story. Here is where we're going to go. Here's who's going to be involved. And here's what's going to happen. Now, a project that big with Sonic isn't going to be just me, obviously. There are numerous parties involved, lots of things to consider. Everyone will contribute, but I want the opportunity to start the conversation so that I can say, this was my idea, not it was their idea and I worked with it. And if I can achieve that, there is nothing short of like defeating Izuka-san Highlander style and becoming the one true Sonic. And that ain't gonna happen.
You could become head of Sega America.
I don't want that job.
No.
Oh, yeah.
No. I don't want Izuka-san's job. That man works so incredibly hard, and has to oversee so many departments and has to get, feedback from all points of the globe and to make sure that this brand is moving in a forward direction. And no, absolutely not. I do not have the patience. I do not have the energy.
I guess you'll have to settle for being the best Bumble King there is.
The one and only.
The ultimate right form.
And personal mountaintop, I want to get Drogoon going. We've worked on it, we've workshopped it, we've experimented, we've built so much in the background. I want it out. I want the book done. I want us to move on to book 2. I want us to get Wynn's story done. And I want to go in a million different directions, but if we can get Wynn's story done, even if you are the one person in the world who reads it, it's done. It's out there. It's been created, and it's mine and Adam's, but mine and Adam's.
Well, hey, I look forward to seeing you climb that mountain. But so far as the Sonic side of things, well, you've been cooking with the Shadow anime. You've been cooking with IDW. I think people really like, Generations. So one day you'll get to make that feast from scratch with everybody else. I'm certain of it.
We'll see. Just wait for the day for them to say, hey, here's the project. To which I will say, okay, I can't believe you actually let me do this.
Here's the project. I already had this pitch 20 years ago. Let me dig it up.
Now, there's something. Keep your eyes peeled. It's something honestly terrifying. Frontiers was terrifying because sure they gave the premise, but it's this is going to be the next installment in the Sonic series. How I portray this will be what Sonic is for the next tentpole game until the next one comes out. Oh, God.
Hey, well, I think it's standing. Aside from the usual things, which, that's going to be audience dependent. I, for one, look forward to the return of Styx.
God, I can't wait. I really. Come on.
I hope she sticks this time.
Bring her back. Come on.
Just like her boomerang, she comes back around.
She should. Dang it. I miss her so much.
All right. We've run out of time, but before we go, Lorenzo, where can folks find your books?
Let's see. You can find Desert Rain on Barnes & Noble's website. You can find Black, White, and Green #1 on anywhere IDW sells their things. Just help me get a little bit more work there. And as for Dragon's Domain, you can find that one generally on Amazon, I'm afraid. Sorry. Whenever the Outer Space comes out, the one me and Mikey worked on, I'll be sure to share that with everyone. But for now, I'm just going to keep working and say thank you, Kyle. Thank you, Ian.
And thank you for supporting the show and bringing in your insights. And again, just picking up on all those little details. That's so validating.
It's no problem.
Thank you for joining us. You've been a fantastic guest. Thank you.
I try. Thank you.
And if you want to be as cool as Lorenzo, head over to patreon.com/BumbleKast, Ko-fi.com/BumbleKast, or become a YouTube member at the guest tier, and you too can be on the show with us, just like we're doing right now.
Ooh.
Until then, be good to yourselves, be good to each other, go read Lorenzo's books, and we will see you next time on the BumbleKast.
Bye, everyone.
You've been listening to the BumbleKast, a co-production of Bumble King Comics and the KNGI Network. Original theme music composed by Ken Coda Snyder. Remixed intro by T-Lopes. Find out more information, along with podcast feeder links, MP3 downloads, and more at bumbleking.com and kngi.org.
Good. Happy to be here. Happy Halloween.
Thank you very much. Happy Halloween to you too. And all of you practicing the Halloween of Weens.
All of you Halloween practitioners out there.
All you Halloweenies.
Can't forget the OG.